It was a Sunday morning. We had all just got finished getting ready for church. The aroma of lightly baked biscuits and sweet tea filled the small kitchen we had all gathered in. Time to leave, my grandmother Elaine had said, picking up her black purse that looked as if it were too big to carry comfortably on one's shoulder. God knows what she had in there. She didn't believe in carrying weapons, but she did tend to hoard certain items in her purse, such as excessive amounts of red lipstick of varying shades. Oh, and might I add enough breath mints to last till Christmas. It was a little windy out, but the heat made up for it. August really was one of the better summer months in my opinion. I was in my room getting things ready, almost done. I just had to tie my shoes, when I hear someone in another room cry, come on, it's about to start. I'm gonna leave you behind, if you don't hurry, as my mother said in a joking, but also non-joking manner. I hurried to the car. I didn't bring much except my tic-tacs. I normally keep a small Kershaw knife in my right pocket, but this time I didn't bring my cell phone, as it would be a distraction to myself and others in the church service. We all hoped in my grandmother's car. She had a newer car, but more like a 2009 small old people style car. You know the ones that reek of heavy cologne, throat lozenges, and cigarettes. Anyways, the smell didn't bother me. It was a sort of stimulation that just reminded me of who she was. Really sort of a comforting smell. We all are inside the car, but everyone else isn't talking, just ready to leave the house and begin the Sunday ritual. I didn't mind going to church, especially if my grandparents went, knowing that they weren't going to be on this planet for very much longer, so I guess I felt obligated to go. My mother was a Christian, my grandmother a certain type of Catholic, and my grandpa following suit with my grandmother. Nothing wrong with Catholicism, just why worship the bringing of a god instead of God himself? We arrive at the service, and it blows through quickly. The theme for today seemed to be about unspoken respect and love for people you have yet to meet. Seemed interesting. I guess they just don't want a bunch of angry Christians leaving church and acting like they don't have time for other people. I seem to be on a different frequency when it comes to communication. I don't know if it's just my generation, or if I'm just more open to different ways of living. Either way, I still respected my parents' view, and those of her parents as well. We had stopped up the road after my grandparents had got in some straight black coffee at a fast food restaurant. I remember falling into some sort of dream state of this helplessness sort of fear the entire time. I remember going up or down the mountain. I couldn't perceive direction in this dream for some reason. And all of a sudden, the side rails of the mountain tear off, and for a sort of train track to drive on, as my car is somehow driving along it perfectly. This goes on for a bit with nothing above or below me to tell how high up I am. This was a very unsettling feeling, and I quickly noticed the rail had ended. I climbed to the top of the car, which was the same car I got in to go to church, and jumped with my hands out, trying to grab anything to save my life in this dream. I had grabbed a hold of this plastic ladder that had almost gave in when the weight of my body pulled down on it, but I was safe and dangling from what I'm guessing pretty high in the air. I start to climb up it, and I put both my arms up and pull myself up, and what I see is pretty confusing. It's a giant furnace, but with no gases or heat coming from it. The belt was moving forward, but at a slow pace. I looked back at my hands, and they were cut up bad and totally covered in blood. I gave the belt on the furnace a closer look, and it was mesh metal, rusted with razor-bladed edges sticking out in different directions. Far away it sort of looked like a valley of mountains. Forward I'm looking now, lucid dreaming, but for some reason I didn't know it was a dream, but still could make all the actions with my own thoughts. There were 4 layers of belts. The first looked as if I could fit if I laid down, but risking the chance to shred my back with the razor-sharp belt. And the other belt just seemed to be getting closer together each time another came about. I laid down face first on the belt facing the way out, and as the belts started to squish and demolish my skin, I had awoken inside a department store holding a pack of razor blades for box cutters. I don't know if this by chance, but I had no recollection of ever coming in the store or picking anything up. Oh well, just a weird dream, I had thought to myself. I looked over and my grandfather was looking at some power tools, a drill to be precise. I browsed the shelves for a minute, and a guy a couple years older than I was slams into my shoulder. I didn't see him, so I thought it was my fault. "I'm sorry, man." "I didn't see you, my fault," I said to him, and he looked back with his black beaded red swung in a fast motion, and he just laughed with his 5 or 6 friends and walked out after taking some things from the store without paying. I shrugged it off. Maybe he was just trying to be cool in front of his friends, or whatever. I get it. I hear some yelling, and it has to be the same group that had walked out of the store just now. Me and my grandpa hear this, and run out without getting anything. It was my cousin, my grandpa's adopted child. He was probably 16. He had a lot going for him, a student, but not many friends. He was slightly autistic, but you couldn't tell just by speaking with him. They had him pinned on the asphalt. 5 to 6 black guys surrounded him, yelling and laughing at him. 2 of the guys were standing in front of my mom and grandma's door, so they couldn't get out. I'm afraid to see what would happen if they did. My grandpa yells at them to get off of him pretty sternly. "Hey, what the fuck do you think you guys are doing to him?" Exclamation point. "That's my son, you better back off, or I'll call the police," he said. They all stopped laughing and smiling, then had this ominous look to all of them, like they knew something we didn't. "What, old man? You gonna kick my ass over this faggot?" Exclamation point. My grandpa stood there in shock, not knowing what to do, but he had to do something. I myself was clueless on what to say next. If the choice of wording was wrong, the outcome might not be pleasant for me, my cousin, or anyone around us. My mother and grandmother in tears, shaking inside the car, while the 2 are still blocking their path, but more aggressively this time. The cops would take at least 10 minutes to get here, and that's if someone calls the police without them seeing, which seemed impossible at this point. It was just 4 of us, and 6 of them, and they clearly wanted to get something out of this by now. My grandpa reaches for his cell phone, and flips it to where he can call. I'm guessing the leader of the bunch slowly raises his hand with one finger up, and puts it to his lips, as if he was telling us to be quiet or else. My grandpa didn't react to what the leader's orders were. His only motive now was to get his son safe and sound before things got ugly. The leader had snapped on of them, walked over to my grandpa, and I could hear 911. "What is your emergency?" And there was silence. He was right in his face, my grandpa visibly shaking with his phone against his ear. "Hello, 911, is there anyone there?" Quote, no response from anyone. I wanted to yell, but I didn't want this to get worse. The call had ended. They must have thought it was a bot dial or a prank. Nobody was on their way. I had the same strange hopelessness I had felt earlier in my dream with getting squished between the furnaces. The man grabbed my grandpa's phone and slowly took it from his hand, now smiling from ear to ear. He put the phone horizontally of his eyes and snapped it in 2 and threw it in a nearby barbell. My mother and grandma still trembling in fear. Nobody knew what to do next. My cousin was still on the ground on his back, but nobody was on him anymore. I see he is crying violently, but trying to do it in a quiet manner, trying not to make things worse. The leader grabs my cousin by the back of his dirtied-up flannel church shirt and asks, "How much is his life worth to you?" Appalled by this new action, my grandpa said I wouldn't give anything in the world to give him up. "Is that so?" the leader said. "So I guess I'm gonna have to take something else then," the leader said with a smirk on his face. He drags my mom out of the car, her face hitting the loose pebbles in the asphalt, first busting her lip. "Get up," the leader had ordered to my cousin and my mom. "Now I'm only gonna rust this one more time," the leader said. "What's a life worth to you?" My grandpa didn't answer, and looked at my mother and his adopted son, eyes darting towards the car. He had the keys, and the only means of leaving was if my grandpa drove. We all move at the same time, and everyone except my cousin makes it inside the car. He's screaming bloody murder at this point. The windows are all down, and I try to grab my cousin, but the leader's body is now halfway inside the car. A shot went off and my cousin is now dead, but we must try to get the leader out of the car now. His legs are sticking out the window, and we're on the highway now going about 70 miles per hour. He has a butterfly knife. He is trying to stab my grandpa, and only gets in good once at his kneecap, which he already has problems with. Screaming in pain, he puts his hands around the leader's throat, and he is pushing his knife further into his flesh. I finally snap out of it, and help my grandpa. I put my hands on both sides of his head, and dig my thumbs into his eye sockets. Strangely enough, this made me feel better about the situation, as if things had been made even. I keep burrowing my thumbs into his eyes until it's just gushing 2 deep holes. We work together and push him outside of the window, and we are still speeding, and his body hits the ground, as if I were to drop a red Kool-Aid slushy. Gore filled the street, and no sense of remorse had filled my head about what I had done. We later drove back and picked up the innocent body they had murdered. His face was calm, but there was no getting past the bullet hole between his eyebrows. We put him in the trunk and drove to my grandparents' house this time. We arrived there with no sound in the car other than the radio static coming from the speakers that nobody bothered to turn off. We park and get out, but we're parked in the backyard, where the underground pool is. Grandpa is acting weird. It's as if this moment was the straw that broke the camel's back. It's like his PTSD triggered a switch in his brain to turn on. It felt almost like I was talking to 2 people at once. Or even maybe the lost soul of his son had been absorbed into my grandpa, and now the only means of communication of his son was still with him, or at least that's what it seemed like, if he didn't go crazy. We're all standing around the pool. It's probably 10 o'clock at night. Nobody saying anything, but thoughts are racing through our heads like a train off the rails. What should we do with his college fund? Asks my grandpa. I want you guys to have it, said my grandpa also. We all look at him, but don't say a thing. He smiles with the tear rolling down his face, and my mother takes me back home. I couldn't sleep, and I knew my mother couldn't sleep. Even if we wanted to, it didn't feel right falling asleep without vengeance. We both knew we would never get revenge, but we always hoped that karma would make her mind up one day and make things right. And that's all we had to ride on. We still had each other, and things could have been worse, but they took an innocent life that day, and something a little more aggressive. That karma needed to come into play,